The results of presidential elections often feel like the biggest decision in the nation, broadcasted everywhere and discussed endlessly. But for the everyday American, does it really matter who wins? On the surface, the answer seems obvious. The President of the United States is the most powerful political figure in the country, with immense influence over policies that shape the nation. And Donald Trump and Kamala Harris seem to be radically different people and potential presidents. Yet, the deeper question is how those decisions trickle down and affect the day-to-day lives of ordinary citizens. For many Americans, the presidency can feel distant. Daily life, whether it's the bills you pay, the job you hold, or the school your kids attend, often seems disconnected from the person sitting in the Oval Office. But this distance is somewhat of an illusion. While the changes may not always be immediately felt, the long-term consequences of a president's decisions are significant. First, consider the economy. It's easy to say that the president doesn't have much control over the economy, but that's only partially true. While broader economic trends are driven by complex global factors, the president's policies can influence how the economy functions for ordinary Americans. Take taxes, for example. Different presidents have distinct ideas about who should be taxed and how much they should pay. A president who pushes for tax cuts for the wealthy, for instance, might spur more investment, but may leave middle and lower-income Americans feeling the pinch when essential services funded by tax dollars suffer cuts. On the other hand, a president who advocates for increasing taxes on the wealthy might be able to fund new programs like healthcare or education, but could face criticism over stifling economic growth. Then there's healthcare, a deeply personal issue for many Americans. The Affordable Care Act, ACA, also known as Obamacare, is one of the clearest examples of how presidential decisions have directly impacted millions of lives. The ACA expanded health coverage to millions who previously couldn't afford it. When it was threatened with repeal under a different administration, countless Americans worried about losing access to essential care. Healthcare policy remains one of the most contentious and impactful areas where the president's decisions directly affect people's lives. Another area where the president's influence becomes clear is the Supreme Court. The president has the power to nominate justices, and those justices hold their positions for life. These appointments can shape the judicial landscape of the nation for decades. From decisions on abortion to voting rights, gun control, and LGBTQ+ rights, the rulings made by the Supreme Court have long-term implications that reach deep into everyday American life. For example, the landmark Roe v. Wade decision on abortion rights has been debated and challenged for decades, and its ultimate fate can hinge on the leanings of just one or two justices appointed by a president. Foreign policy may seem even more removed from everyday concerns, but it can have serious implications on domestic life. Trade deals negotiated by a president, for instance, can affect the prices of goods, job opportunities, and entire industries. A trade war might sound like a battle between nations, but it can result in rising prices for basic goods at home or the collapse of industries that many Americans rely on for employment. Defense and national security policies are other areas where the president's decisions can be felt. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, initiated or continued under different administrations, deeply impacted the lives of service members and their families. Beyond that, national security measures enacted post-9/11 have reshaped everyday experiences for all Americans, from increased airport security to surveillance policies. Whether or not you agree with these measures, it's clear that the president's decisions play a role in shaping the balance between security and personal freedoms. Climate change is another issue that, while global, is directly influenced by the president's stance on environmental regulations. Depending on who sits in the Oval Office, policies related to clean energy, emissions, and environmental protections can either progress or regress. For families living near industrial areas, policies that reduce pollution can have a direct impact on their health and quality of life. Similarly, areas prone to natural disasters, such as hurricanes or wildfires, often find themselves on the front lines of climate change. How the president responds to these crises, whether by investing in disaster preparedness or rolling back environmental protections, can make a tangible difference in people's lives. Immigration is another contentious issue that feels far removed from the lives of many Americans. Unless they themselves are immigrants or live in communities where immigration policies play a role in day-to-day life. Presidents who take a hard stance on immigration enforcement can create environments of fear and uncertainty in immigrant communities, often leading to family separations, deportations, or strict border controls that affect the flow of labor and goods. Despite these many areas of impact, it's also true that the president's power is not absolute. The United States government operates with checks and balances, meaning that the president must work with Congress to pass legislation. If Congress is controlled by the opposing party, the president may struggle to enact major changes. For example, when President Obama faced a Republican-controlled Congress, it became nearly impossible for him to push forward the more progressive parts of his agenda, leading to legislative gridlock. For everyday Americans, much of what the president does can feel like it exists in a bubble, disconnected from the everyday grind of life. After all, local issues like education, infrastructure, and policing are often more directly influenced by state and local governments. Yet, while the president doesn't have control over these issues, the tone set by the federal government can influence the broader policy landscape. For instance, federal funding for infrastructure projects, education grants, and public safety initiatives is often decided at the national level. Then there's the cultural impact of who occupies the White House. The president is not only a policymaker, but a figurehead who represents the nation to the world. They can shape national discussions, influence social norms, and guide the public discourse on key issues. A president who champions inclusivity and diversity can foster a more progressive national conversation, while a president who embraces divisive rhetoric can deepen existing societal fractures. This cultural influence can resonate far beyond the specific policies they implement. So, does it really matter who wins the presidential election? The answer is a resounding yes. While some changes may not be felt immediately, the policies and decisions made by a president can have profound long-term consequences for the nation and its citizens. From the economy to healthcare, national security to immigration, the choices made in the White House ripple out to affect the lives of everyday Americans in ways both seen and unseen. Ultimately, presidential elections are about more than just political parties and campaign promises. They shape the direction of the country for years to come. And for ordinary citizens, the outcomes can determine the quality of life, opportunities, and freedoms they experience.